Yeah.
And we on our Friday show last week, St. John's was one of the future bets that we played at 40-1.
Mm-hmm.
Wanted to make sure we got that in too before the Connecticut game. And they dropped, but they only dropped to 30-1. So there's still a very good 30-1 to win the national championship.
Well, Greg, after you mentioned that, I got to thinking. I says, my goodness, Greg calls out a great point about this team being 40-1 and very well aware of Patino in his second year of a program. So I immediately went out and played them at 30-1. So it did drop as low as 30-1, but I still feel at this time it's value. If they make the NCAA basketball tournament, I think you won't get 30-1 if they make the tournament, but still a big Rick Pitino fan. We'll see what happens there.
I'd like to bring up a point, and I'm sure Andy can expound upon this because he knows these numbers better than anybody. But one of the conversations that we had off air the other day on the show, we call it the pizza show, the Dom DeMarco's show that I do, was when you're betting these future bets, it takes some guts to do it because let's say you put $1,000 on St. John's in the tournament when it starts, money line bet, and then you just keep rolling it, you get a much better payout than taking the 30 or 40-1. However, when you get down to that last couple games, you're actually betting some really big money, and a lot of people kind of crash and burn at that when you say, I'm betting $50,000 in this game today. Because
that's if you want to win 750,000, you are,
Well, they want to take some of it off the table. Normally, people take some of it off the table, which I think is smart to do. If you take some off the table, is smart. But now, Andy? You have numbers on that?
I know that in general, if you, if let's say before the tournament starts, you can take future odds in the tournament, or you can do that rollover method. More often than not, the rollover method works out. Now, the only time it may be a little difficult is if you've got a team that's on a nice little run where they're underdogs, and then they become favorites after they've won, say, 3 tournament games where you were expecting them to be underdogs throughout, but because of the teams that other teams knocked out, you've now got other underdogs that your underdog is now favored against. But normally they say that in most situations it's better to roll over the money game from game starting with the round of 64. But you're right, a lot of people may not have the discipline to let it run out. But that's no different than having those 40-1 odds before the tournament starts and deciding at some point you're going to do a hedge. As I've mentioned many, many times, and some people agree, some people don't, that the risk is being in position to guarantee yourself a profit. So if you're able to be in a position where whatever you do, like Scott Pritchard the other day, his risk was having the Eagles make the Super Bowl. He's guaranteed a profit if he wants. Now it's a question: does he want to let it ride? Does he want to hedge part of it or all of it? Because the risk, he'd already eliminated the risk if he wants to.
Well, in essence, that's what you're doing here.
From yesterday, and he did hedge, and he won close to 6 figures on it.
Yeah.
Well, what are we talking about dollar size? Because 95% of our viewers don't have the capital. So where do you need to be, Andy, in order for that to be successful? Like, what kind of money investment are you talking about?
Yeah, but money's relative, though, isn't it?
It's all what you do, and there are probably numbers out there that you can scour the internet. I don't necessarily have them, but you can figure out once you know what the matchups are, what the money line is. So you can, let's say, take $100, start with 100 or 110, however you want to do it at 11 to 10, and just keep rolling it over and figure it out that if you're right 6 times, what does that come out to? It might come out to 32-1, depending upon if you're an underdog in some of those early games. So the dollar amount doesn't really matter as much as trying to roll it over and figure out what the ultimate odds are and compare that to what you're getting before the tournament tips off. So the dollars are all relative to what you can afford, but the odds are going to be the same.
Well, what about the money line guys for a team that like Scott Pritchard did, and he had the Eagles making it to the Super Bowl, and you take a basketball team to make it to the finals of the NCAA tournament, you're going to be laying some pretty expensive money line prices with the popular team. So the question is at what point do they become an underdog And at that point, do you hedge the bet with the underdog, or you just keep rolling the money line all the way through?
For me, as a bettor that does play substantial dollars on this stuff, I always hedge because I'm not in the business. I mean, I'm not going to put anything in the bank by saying, oh, I hit 65%. What I put in the bank, if I choose to use a bank, is how much money I make. I'm in the business, and we're all in the business of actually making money. It doesn't do us any good. Oh, I hit 75% and then you're broke. It only makes sense if you're making money doing this. So I talked to Scott, Fezzik talked to Scott. We all said the same thing. You have to hedge. You're sitting there with a $4,000 investment to win 220 or 224, and yeah, you can walk away with $100,000 no matter what.
Yeah,
and that's what he did.
Well, that was a smart
what I
thing.
tell people all the time, and I think I've said it before in the last few weeks when we're talking about Super Bowls and hedging, is that, okay, if you're in town for the Super Bowl and you're an occasional bettor, maybe you bet 2-3 times a year, you may want to let it ride, depending upon the size of the wager and your bankroll or your position in life. On the other hand, if you're doing it every day or basically every day, you want to show a profit as many days as possible. And if you're in a position on a Tuesday afternoon in the middle of July to show a profit in baseball for whatever reason, you go ahead and do it. And it adds up over the cost of time because the bottom line is, yes, like Jim said, you want to cash tickets and be ahead of the game. And percentages are a little bit different in baseball because it's all money line. But even so, you want to be in a position where the risk is getting in position to guarantee yourself a profit. And if you can guarantee yourself a profit and you're doing this every day, probably makes sense to do so.
And this is strategies it only works if you're talking about you really want to zero in on one team, correct?
Well, if you're betting the future, it would be one team. Like you're going to go bet St. John's.
No, if you do it the other way, if you do it the every game in every tournament way.
I mean, roll over each game.
The rollover way. That only works though if you're like, all right, St. John's is the team. I'm putting all of my money and my pick for the tournament into this one team, and so I'm going to do the rollover strategy. So it really only works if you do the rollover with one team, correct?
You could do it with a number of teams that you're getting prices on. I mean, you could take Kentucky. Doesn't take John's at 30? I mean, you could. I'm just seeing what you have.
You can do it. Yeah. But doesn't that make things a little bit more risky?
No, because remember, let's say you've got 4 teams that you like, one in each region, okay? Well, you can play the futures on all of them to win the tournament, but you can only cash one of those tickets. So instead of saying, I'll put $100 down on Creighton to win the NCAA tournament, and I'll do $100 on this other team, you take the $400 wagers and you roll them over because you can only cash one ticket at the end. Now, the thing, however, with doing the rollover thing is if you decide that, well, I think this team has gone as far as I can go, you've already made a profit, so you can get out. You can't do that necessarily with a futures
Andy,
team.
that is excellent advice. That is really smart advice. I had not thought about doing that. That's a good tip. Yeah. Excellent.
Yeah, you're only going to win with one team. Exactly.
Yeah.
That's right.
Right.
It's just a question of how you play it.
And there's always a good and bad to everything. So what's the good and bad to what is the good for futures and what is the bad for rollovers?
Well, the problem with futures is this. If you're a bookmaker and you see St. John's and you say, okay, I'm going to offer 30-1 because they're a popular team, the real odds may be 50 or 60-1. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you're really getting robbed. At the future.
Well, I want to know what the good is for the future. You've already kind of said that there is
no good at betting a future. None.
Well, the only thing is
if you're not going to ever get the right price. Like a two-team parlay should pay more than what they pay. They rob you. That's the problem.
The only way I feel, Jim, that I made a good move in betting a college basketball tournament future is if I bet the games now as opposed to when the tournament starts. And I've got Johnny's at 30-1 now, figuring that when the tournament gets here, if Johnny's is there, they win the Big East. Let's throw that in there. Then all of a sudden they're 12-1 or 15.
Yeah, that's okay. So
then you beat the later price. That's Perfect.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's
See,
important
the
to know.
thing with Greg, what you asked is that the advantage of playing the future is you know exactly what you're going to win if you win. And then it's a question of how the tournament unfolds, and would it have been better off to roll it over? Now, remember, when you're making that bet on St. John's at 30-1, when the odds might really be 50-1, you don't know their path to the NCAA tournament because you're holding a ticket at 30-1. Once the tournament field is set and the games actually play out, the rollover might produce 35-1, or it could produce 25-1, and you're holding a 30-1 ticket because you don't know. The only thing you know with the futures is that if you're right, you're guaranteed this amount. And that is sometimes an advantage over the rollover method because you don't know how the tournament's going to unfold. And St. John's all of a sudden may be a bigger favorite than you thought they were based upon their draw. At the same time, and this is again what we talked about with the rollover method, you can quit anytime you want, and after you've won the first game, you're probably already shown a profit, of course, of something, and then hopefully you get 2 to 3 wins. And if you can make it to the Elite Eight, that means you've won 3 games already in the rollover.
So it sounds like to me
Here's
then
a
that
perfect example, Andy, of what you just talked about. You take one team in each division for
Region. Yep.
You roll them over at every one of those situations, where if you bet 4 on the futures, you can only win 1.
Yeah.
all right.
Means you gotta lose
So
3.
really,
Yeah, if you do the rollover and you play it all the way through to the finals, you're only going to cash 1 ticket. But because you're rolling over 4 games, you can hedge, you can pull out anytime you want. So theoretically, with the rollover method, you can end up cashing out. Now, you may not get the full odds that you had anticipated because you're pulling out early, but you may end up being ahead because let's say all 4 teams that you've rolled over, you'll have won 3 games if they all make, let's say, the Elite Eight, or they will have won 2 games if they make the Sweet 16. So you could end up cashing 4 tickets, not at the full odds, but you'll have shown a nice profit anyway because you've already passed the risk of getting to those, let's say, that 3rd round of the tournament.
all right. So basically, what I've deducted here, and I'm glad that Mark brought this up because that was what I was looking for, which is because this is the reason I do it. I do futures, sort of like what we talked about the last couple of weeks, Jim. It's about getting the number before you think it's going to drop. Like, you know what? Like we did. Because we went ahead with now we had already had Florida.
You bet Baylor at 130-1.
Yeah, we had St. John's at 40, UCLA at 90, and Baylor at 130 for the reason of not saying, well, all these teams are great, but I think that this is going to end up being a bargain number by the time we get to the tournament. If these teams get on a roll, then I have them at this number, which is going to be a much better number than it would be. But in the other way, if I'm only talking about, hey, it's the week of the tournament, then the rollover strategy obviously then makes a lot more sense. So yeah, that I'm glad that we got that straightened out because that's the whole reason I like to do futures. I like to do futures based on I'm projecting that I'm getting a bargain, and I want to take advantage of that.
And you did get some good bargains on those numbers, definitely.
Yeah, Florida's now down to 11, and they were 21 just before they had the win against
Auburn.
Yeah, so now they're down to 11. So I had them at 17. They went to 21. Now they're down to 11. So
SEC is going to be very difficult to handicap. They would get what are they talking? 12, 13 teams in the tournament because the league is so large right now. But they're going to knock each other off. So maybe now you want to take a look. Like I like Alabama, but not at the current price.